Generation Z. Before I start, where are they? After all, it's hardly seen in the room. Our middle-aged people talk about Generation Z. Sometimes it's quite interesting. When we talk about Generation Z, who are they? We still need to make sure that we know. For Gen Z, what is the age group? I think there is really a definition. However, is it from 1995 to 2000 or 1908 to 2001 or 2006? It is a bit ambiguous. If we see the history, since we have the people with label, that we might able to figure it out. In this century, first of all, for this group was the baby boom, 1946 to 64. It was after the Second World War where the landscape was being reshaped and economic rejuvenation and revival. I think for that generation was sort of spoiled. The war made it lose a lot. So for that generation, they were better treated. And then we have 64 to 79. Sometimes, especially in the US, there was really a generation of collapse because the regional war or fast-growing society, a lot of changes that they hide themselves against the mainstream, the anti-war, and they've done things that were not in line with the mainstream. And later, after the reform and opening up in China, materialism and sufficient consumerism from 85 to 95. So we talk about Gen Z. At the very first, it was like Generation N. It's internet-based generation. When we talk about 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s, it was because of the distinctions of their environment. After 95 or 98, because of the development of internet, we call them, they were the primitive residents of internet. So it doesn't really matter what the specific years they were born. However, they were really the primitive residents of the internet. And the major differences prior to 1995, they were like the digital migrants. When they were at school, there were no mobile phones, non-existent. But for Gen Z, yesterday we released statistics. People under age of 10 with a fast-growing speed of 21% of growth. All of them were mobile users. So the primitive residents of internet, what they were consuming in China, I believe there was about 20% of the share of the demography, and there were about 300 million in China from 1995 to 2009. People were born during that period of time. And for that, percentage was not dramatic, but the online consuming power and the percentage of active users on internet reached about 32.9%. And for the last year, the newly growing percentage, they took about 42.4%, which is really a sizable part of the demography. And so we try to, from an adult point of view, to understand this generation from certain pieces that we were able to see the whole picture. It was really a description, so let's see these elements. The previous discussions were over on vertical consumption. They were so active. and their main target lied in Zhihu, Douban, Bilibili, YouTube. They were the popular sites. Interestingly, in this group of people, where they choose to live is also interesting. They hope they have more options for Tier 1 to live. For in these Tier 1 residents, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Shanghai, could you have a guess? Where do they want to live? I know they have the individual answers, but it's really a common and popular answer. I'm not right either.
It's Guangzhou, followed by Shenzhen and Shanghai and Beijing. So we need to deliver this message to Beijing. So for this young generation or group, 40% possible that they regard friends and pets are both important. And then watching UGC video and following the broadcasters to be their fans, it's quite normal. And these two previous guests there are quite used to have a large number of followers. So what is the significance of this profiling? They are Aborigines for internet landscape, and they're born to share this spirit of internet, that is grassroots hero and equality. So let's look at a day of Generation Z, just like all of us, study, eat, and sleep. Well, study is part of their important time of the day, while the phone utilization hour is around 4 hours per day. Is it too much or not much? Comparing with our internet population, this number is not much, because the average usage of phones per day is 5 hours. But just think about when you were their age, what kind of media you were using. You can imagine how big a consumption power will these Generation Z to be in the future. So what do they do online? First of all, social networking, chatting. So these internet aborigines has a very strong psychological, emotional, and the recognition, gaining, appealing is very important and satisfied online for them. Another important thing for them is listening to music, watching videos and short videos, and also 40% of the time are spent on news. Also shopping online. I would decide what to buy and what to look at. So this is the time they spend online. So the Generation Z focus a lot on the entertainment. What would be the content for the entertainment for them? Well, if they have a long disposable time, they would watch long video like the films or TV series, which take up a lot of their time. And for other contents, it's also good, such as music and online literature and social networking and short video. How do they use their fragmented time? It is very interesting. They would log on the social networking while listening to music, or watching the short video while social networking. Well, there's much more percentage of people watching the online literature than before. I think that sends out a signal to us when we try to communicate with our young colleagues or the young generation. So if you are older generation, you found out your children are doing their homework while listening to music. Don't be too worried because they are born with multitasking ability. You don't need to worry about them. Regarding the preference of a short video, if we look at the leading contents, it covers the fun things, sceneries, or natural scenes, or traveling, etc. So most of the content is no difference from other older generations' interest. And the main difference is they focus a lot on the beautiful faces. And I think that's quite normal for this era. Well, regarding music content, some type of music genre stand out, such as the Chinese characteristic music, accounting for 49.9% of the total, which is higher than the number before 1995. Well, for the middle and long tail genres, it's quite dispersed, like the rock and roll or animated music or folklore. Well, for these internet aborigines, they are used to rich content and sources of information. They don't feel much the limits of this information, so there's more diversity in their preferences and interests. So many people are thinking about gaming. When we think about Generation Z, then in this genre, the electronic computer or electronic sports actually is part of the gaming, and it has been part of the Olympic Games as well. So for this Generation Z, they started with the electronic sports as a fun thing to do, and then it evolved into a profession. Before, some parents would ask their children, if you play so much game, can you make money on that? And it's possible now. About consumption online by this young generation, first, mobile phones. Well, before 1995, it's also the same. I think that is not a big change there. But what about the purpose? When the Generation Z watching content over phones, what is the focus? First, they need to catch up with the facts, the things happening around the world. They need to keep pace with the evolving world. That is the first priority need. And secondly, due to their age, they have a very strong desire to absorb skills, knowledges, and information from the world. They want to expand their vision, explore their horizon, and have some entertainment or relaxation, and enrich their personal literacy, and find answers to their questions of interest. And thirdly, due to living in this information era, searching for answers online through the vertical portals or websites, it is a natural behavior for this Generation Z. So they have a very high level of social networking intelligence. So for this Generation Z, when they receive the content, they would search what they need. And for us, we are having a conclusion is that these netizens of China is hungry. It's hungry. They want to get everything because they their available resources is limited. But for the Generation Z, it's different. They living in mammoth of information resources. They have been used to interaction and feedback online to enrich themselves. This is a big difference from previous generation. In the sector of online music, we see the difference between the leading genres and the long tail genres. Well, for the information or facts genres, I think there also a big difference from the leading genres and the long tail genres. And it can be divided into more genres. So for Generation Z, they would like to have a brief or simple explanation of a complicated situation or things, and they want real-time delivery or interaction, and they appreciate opinions, debate or discussions with the interaction. So those newly absorbed information derived from such interactions. So it's a different requirement towards the information or source providers. For example, for this interest of 3 different types add up to over 50%. It's quite a different number before 1995. So for this new generation, they have a very diversified interest scope. Only 8.7% of them think these information available are sufficient. Because these new generations has a very in-depth requirement or interest into a certain genre. So this would warrant a good exploration for us as content providers. And another feature is that creation for passion. We talk about Maslow's needs paradigm. So we first need to satisfy our basic survival needs with food and clothing and sheltering. And then we will try to satisfy our higher level needs. While for the Generation Z, they are used to start with the higher level of needs. So some older generation are doing things for survival. Some generation are doing jobs or doing business for development. While for Generation Z, they are doing things for what they like. So they would focus on the content of interest, and they would focus on those KOLs, and they would have a strong participatory interest in the content creation. The last session, people mentioned about the future after 5G comes. We should hold high hopes for this Generation Z, because if you look into their creation and sharing of the videos and pictures, you will see the strong desire behind that, and they have such a strong creation needs. It is a good thing because for these UGC videos in the background of 5G technology, will drive up a fast growth on the provision and the consumption side for VR or real-time interactive immersive experience are just the things for the Generation Z. So for the Generation Z profiling from left to right, well, actually from right to left, it shows their way of growth across 15 years age gap. Some people are in the QQ times, some people are focusing on the WeChat platform. So some of the groups used to share content with the QQ and QQ Space. When they grow older, they have more complicated relationships and undertook more obligations. They start to shift more on the WeChat platform for sharing. So this is the shift process. So with this evolution, they just choose different channels. If you look into their QQ Space and their WeChat moments, there's no much difference in terms of the data. So how do they look at sharing content? And how about the older generation? The older generation actually has more worries about sharing content. While for the Generation Z, they are more willing to share their thoughts and content because many of their gains or attainment comes from the sharing from other people in terms of knowledge and skill acquirement and inspirations. So it's like a source of their inspiration for them. So that's why when they share their own content, they are not so reluctant. If you look at these data, comparing them with the people born before 1985, it's so different. So we just put you a very brief profiling of this Generation Z. We are looking into the other side, and maybe what we are thinking will drive them laughing, because they will be the real actors of their generation.
So for Gen Z, Generation Z, why we haven't named any other generation following Generation Z? Because there aren't so many more changes. If we look further ahead, when the AI continues to develop, in a matter of 5 years, Gen Z will become the mainstay of university students. In 20 years, Gen Z will be the major decision makers of the world. The challenges faced by Gen Z is the interaction between human and machine, and the common challenges faced by human and machine. So they have big challenges and responsibility on their shoulders. That is why Gen Z is defined by loving to share, not limited by boundaries, full of love to the world and challenged by the world. So we have to be nice to Gen Z because we still have much ahead to expect from them.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chen.